At my gold-digging granddaughter's wedding, they gave me a name tag that read, "The Absent Old Lady." I smiled, and as the limousine took me home, they received the bill for the entire party. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The elegant notes of Patchell's canon floated through the air as I stepped into the grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel. I had spent 4 hours getting ready for Emily's wedding. My arthritic fingers struggling with each pearl button on my pale blue dress, the one I'd carefully saved for setting aside a little from my Social Security checks each month. You'll look beautiful, Margaret. I had told myself that morning, applying a touch of lipstick and securing my silver hair into a neat bun. At 72, I still took pride in my appearance, especially for important family occasions. My heart fluttered with anticipation. After months of minimal contact, I'd finally be spending time with my family, particularly Emily, my only granddaughter. The invitation had arrived 8 weeks ago, formal and impersonal, but an invitation nonetheless. I'd responded immediately, hoping this would be a chance to bridge the growing distance between us. The wedding coordinator, a slim young woman with a tight ponytail and even tighter smile, directed me toward the reception desk. Name? She asked, barely looking up from her tablet. Margaret Collins, I replied, unable to hide the pride in my voice. The grandmother of the bride. Her fingers skimmed over the tablet. Right. Here's your name tag. She slid a small badge across the counter. I picked it up, expecting to see my name elegantly printed. Instead, scrolled in hasty handwriting were the words, "The Absent Old Lady." My fingers trembled as I held the badge. Surely this was a mistake, a terrible error. Excuse me, I said, my voice suddenly dry. There seems to be a problem with my... We're quite busy, ma'am, she interrupted, already looking past me to the next guest. The ceremony starts in 30 minutes. Please find your seat. I clutched the badge, a small piece of paper that somehow weighed heavier than anything I'd carried in years. Across the room, I spotted Emily surrounded by bridesmaids, radiant in her designer gown. Her laughter floated toward me, bright and carefree. Next to her stood my son Robert, handsome in his tuxedo, arm wrapped around his wife Linda's waist. And there was Michael, Emily's soon-to-be husband, a tall man with sharp features and sharper ambitions. I'd met him only twice. Both times he'd barely acknowledged my presence. I slowly pinned the badge to my dress, each press of my fingers feeling like a quiet surrender. No one would notice anyway, I told myself. No one had noticed me in years. The usher, a young man who couldn't be bothered to look me in the eye, guided me to my seat far back in the corner, behind a large floral arrangement that partially blocked my view of the altar. I settled in, arranging my dress, carefully clutching my small beaded purse that contained a check, a wedding gift representing 4 months of careful budgeting. Is this seat taken? I looked up to find an elderly gentleman pointing to the chair beside me. No, please, I said, grateful for the company. Arthur Bennett. He introduced himself. Friend of the family. Margaret Collins, I replied. I'm Emily's grandmother. His eyebrows shot up. The grandmother of the bride, sitting back here. I offered a practiced smile, the same one I'd perfected over years of family gatherings where I was more decoration than participant. It's fine, I assured him, though it wasn't. Throughout the ceremony, I strained to see past the flowers. When Emily and Michael exchanged vows, I could only catch glimpses of their profiles. When guests stood to applaud the newlyweds, I stood too, wiping away a tear, not of joy, but of something closer to resignation. At the reception, I discovered my table assignment was equally telling. Table 19, the furthest from the bridal party, populated by distant acquaintances and workplace obligations. The table card labeled it Extended Connections. I watched as Robert gave his father of the bride speech, reminiscing about Emily's childhood stories I'd lived through, moments I'd shaped. Yet not once did he mention my name or my role in raising her during those difficult years after his divorce, when he'd been too busy rebuilding his career to handle a teenage daughter. When dinner ended, I made my way toward the bridal table gift envelope in hand. Emily saw me approaching and whispered something to Michael. They both looked at me, then quickly engaged in conversation with the best man. "Emily, darling," I said, reaching the table. "You look absolutely beautiful." She turned her smile, not quite reaching her eyes. "Oh, Grandma, you made it." "Of course I did. I wouldn't miss your special day." I extended the envelope. "A small gift. You can leave it with the others," she interrupted, gesturing toward a decorated table piled with presents. "We're about to start the dance." She turned away before I could even kiss her cheek. As I placed my envelope among the mountain of expensive-looking gifts, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the wedding planner's clipboard, abandoned momentarily on a nearby chair, was a checklist. Under special arrangements, I clearly read Margaret Collins. Isolated seating, minimal interaction, as requested by bride's mother. I stood there, the room suddenly spinning around me. All these years, I'd told myself they were just busy, just preoccupied. I'd made excuses for the missed phone calls, the abbreviated holiday visits, the forgotten birthdays. But this was deliberate. This was orchestrated. And in that moment, something inside me, something that had bent and bent for years without breaking, finally snapped. I found a quiet corner near the coat check and tried to gather my composure. A lifetime of memories crashed over me like waves against a weathered shore. I remembered the day Emily was born, how I'd rushed to the hospital with a handmade blanket I'd spent months knitting. I remembered the summers she stayed with me when Robert and Linda were working on their marriage, how she'd sit at my kitchen table drawing pictures and telling me about her dreams while I baked her favorite chocolate chip cookies. Those early years had been precious. I taught her to read, to garden, to appreciate classical music. I was the one who noticed her artistic talent and bought her first set of watercolors. When she won the school art competition at age 10, it was my shoulder she cried, happy tears on. Everything changed when Robert finally divorced Linda and remarried Karen 3 years later. Karen came from money, old money, and suddenly my modest home and simple ways weren't good enough. Emily's visits became shorter, less frequent, and eventually stopped altogether, except for obligatory holiday appearances. I sold my house when I was 65. The house where I'd raised Robert alone after my William died of a heart attack at 42. Robert had been only 13 then, and I'd worked 2 jobs to ensure he could go to college. That house held every memory I cherished. But I sold it because Robert said he needed help with Emily's tuition at that prestigious private arts academy. "It's an investment in her future, Mom," he'd said. This opportunity could change her life. I believed him. I would have done anything for that child. The $200,000 from my house sale went directly to Emily's education fund. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town, telling myself it was cozy rather than cramped, that the constant noise from the highway outside my window was urban ambiance rather than a nuisance. Robert promised they'd visit every Sunday. That lasted exactly 3 weeks. Then it was once a month, then holidays, then just Christmas. And even that became an abbreviated 2-hour visit where they arrived late and left early, laden with the gifts I'd spent months selecting, though I never saw Emily wear or use any of them. Standing in that corner of the ballroom, watching the family I'd sacrificed everything for celebrate without me, I realized how completely I'd been erased. "Mrs. Collins," a gentle voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find an older gentleman in a chauffeur's uniform. "Thomas Bennett," he introduced himself. "I used to drive for the Hendersons next door to you years ago." "Thomas." I smiled genuinely, pleased to see a familiar face. What a small world. "I work for Elite Limousine Service now," he explained. "I'm assigned to the wedding party tonight." His kind eyes studied my face. "Are you all right, Mrs. Collins? You seem troubled." Something about his sincere concern broke through my carefully constructed facade. "Oh, Thomas," I whispered. "I don't think I belong here." I showed him my name tag. His face darkened with indignation. "That's disgraceful," he said quietly. "Absolutely disgraceful." "It's been this way for years," I admitted. "I just didn't want to see it." Thomas glanced at his watch. "My shift runs until midnight, but I'm not scheduled for any pickups for the next few hours. Would you like me to drive you home?" "No charge, of course." I hesitated, looking back toward the reception where the guests were gathering for the cake cutting. Another moment, I would watch from the periphery. "They won't even notice I'm gone," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Thomas offered his arm. "My car is right outside Mrs. Collins." As we walked through the hotel lobby, I spotted the wedding planner deep in conversation with the hotel manager. They were reviewing a document, and I caught fragments of their discussion. "Final payment due tonight. Bride's parents' credit card on file. Balance of $50, $250. I paused. An idea small at first, then expanding like ripples in a pond, began to form. In the limousine settled against the soft leather seats, I asked Thomas, "Do you happen to know who's paying for the wedding?" "The bride's parents arranged everything through Elite," he replied. "Mr. Robert Collins put down the deposits, but the final contracts list both him and the bride as financially responsible parties." I nodded slowly, remembering the conversation I'd overheard between Robert and Karen at Thanksgiving. Mom's house money covered most of Emily's tuition, but we had to tap into our savings for this wedding. Thank God for those zero-interest credit cards. "Thomas," I said carefully, "how well do you know the management at the Harrington?" "Fairly well, Mrs. Collins. I've been driving their VIP guests for 7 years now. If I wanted to make a change to the payment arrangements for tonight's event, who would I speak with?" Thomas met my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" For the first time that evening, I smiled. A real smile, not the practiced one I'd worn like armor. "I'm not sure yet, but I believe I've been absent long enough." "Don't you?" The following morning, I woke to the insistent ringing of my telephone. I let it go to the answering machine, listening as Robert's voice filled my small apartment, tight with barely controlled rage. "Mom, what the hell did you do? The hotel is saying the final payment was canceled and rearranged. They're charging us the entire amount. Call me back immediately." I sipped my tea, watching the morning sunlight filter through my curtains. Another call came in. Karen, this time her voice shrill and demanding. After my conversation with Thomas last night, I'd asked him to take me to the hotel's billing office. The night manager had been skeptical at first, but after I'd shown him my ID and explained that I wanted to remove the complimentary grandmother contribution from the wedding costs, he'd understood. "Family disagreement?" he'd asked discreetly. "Family clarification," I'd corrected. My phone rang again. Emily now leaving a tearful message about how Michael's parents were horrified how their honeymoon might have to be canceled. How could I do this to her on her special day? I thought about my name tag, about my seat behind the flowers, about minimal interaction as requested. I thought about my house, about the educational fund, about all the Sundays I'd sat waiting for visitors who never came. Then I picked up my teacup, took another sip, and began to plan the next chapter of my life. One where I was no longer absent. One where finally I mattered to myself. The next 3 days passed in a storm of voicemails, each more desperate than the last. I listened to them with detached curiosity, as if they were radio broadcasts from a distant country. "Mom, we need to talk about this right now." Robert's voice had lost its commanding edge, replaced by something closer to panic. "Margaret, please be reasonable." Karen's message began her usual condescension, unable to mask her anxiety. This is becoming embarrassing for everyone. By the fourth day, the tone shifted. Grandma Emily's voice tearful but calculated. We're having to cancel our honeymoon to Bali. Is that what you wanted to ruin my special time with Michael? I sat at my small kitchen table, running my finger along the rim of my teacup. The morning light streamed through the window, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. Outside, a garbage truck rumbled down the street, the rhythmic beeping a counterpoint to my thoughts. I hadn't expected this hollow feeling. In movies, revenge is always sweet satisfying, but all I felt was emptiness and the faintest flicker of resolve. My doorbell rang, startling me from my reverie. Through the peephole, I saw Robert shifting impatiently in the hallway, his expensive watch glinting as he checked the time. Karen stood beside him, arms crossed, her face set in lines of displeasure. I considered not answering, but some habits die hard. I'd never been able to turn my son away, even when he'd all but abandoned me. "Mom," Robert began the moment I opened the door, not bothering with a greeting. "This has gone far enough. You need to fix this." I stepped back, allowing them into my apartment. Their eyes swept over my modest furnishings with poorly concealed disdain. "Would you like some tea?" I offered, more out of ingrained politeness than genuine hospitality. "We don't have time for tea," Karen snapped. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I settled into my armchair, gesturing for them to sit on the sofa. Robert remained standing, hands thrust into his pockets. "I simply clarified the financial arrangements," I said calmly. As the grandmother of the bride, I was expected to contribute. But as the absent old lady, I felt my contribution should be absent as well. Robert's face flushed. "What are you talking about?" I crossed to the sideboard where my purse still sat from the wedding night. From inside, I withdrew the name tag and placed it on the coffee table between us. Karen's eyes widened slightly before she looked away. Robert picked up the badge, confusion creasing his brow. "This must have been a mistake," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "Was it also a mistake to seat me behind the floral arrangement?" I asked. "Was it a mistake when the wedding planner's notes specified minimal interaction with me?" Karen's gaze darted to Robert, a silent warning passing between them. "We didn't," Robert began. "Please don't lie to me." I interrupted, my voice soft but firm. "I've had enough lies over the years, enough promises about Sunday visits that never happened, enough assurances that the money from my house was being well spent." The silence that followed was deafening. "Mom," Robert finally said, his tone slipping into the one he used for difficult clients. "I understand you're upset, but this reaction is completely disproportionate. The hotel is demanding $50, $250 immediately. We don't have that kind of liquid cash right now." "I sold my house for $200,000, I replied. "Every penny went to Emily's education because you said it was an investment in her future. Where did the rest of the money go, Robert?" He shifted uncomfortably. "That's not relevant right now." "It's entirely relevant," I countered. "That money was meant for my retirement. Instead, I live here." I gestured to the apartment, the water stain on the ceiling, the radiator that clanked all winter. "While you and Karen have a 6-bedroom house in Maplewood Estates, while Emily has designer clothes and European vacations." Karen stood abruptly. "We didn't come here to be interrogated about our finances. We came to resolve the hotel situation." I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who had systematically removed me from my son's life, from my granddaughter's life. "The situation is already resolved," I said. "The hotel will be paid in full by the responsible parties as per the contract." "We can't afford this right now," Robert exploded. "The business is going through a transition, and with the down payment on Emily and Michael's condo." He stopped, realizing what he'd revealed. You bought them a condo? I asked, the final piece falling into place. That's where my house money went. The silence confirmed my suspicion. Get out, I said quietly. Robert's expression shifted to disbelief. Mom, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I replied, standing. My knees protested, but I ignored the pain. Get out of my home. This isn't over, Karen warned as I opened the door. You're right, I agreed. It's just beginning. After they left, I sat trembling in my chair for a long time. Standing up to them had cost me more than they could ever understand. For years, I'd accepted crumbs of attention, convinced myself it was enough. The fear of losing even those crumbs had kept me compliant, grateful for the barest acknowledgement of my existence. But now I'd crossed a line. There would be consequences, retaliation. I was terrified, and yet beneath the fear, a small, steady flame of determination burned. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Collins, this is Richard Harris from First Capital Bank. I'm calling about your safety deposit box. There seems to be some confusion I'd like to clear up. My throat tightened. What kind of confusion? Your son Robert came in this morning with a power of attorney document requesting access to your box. The document appeared irregular, so I declined access pending your confirmation. I clutched the edge of the table for support. I never signed a power of attorney. That's what concerned me, Richard replied. Would you be able to come to the bank today to review the document? An hour later, I sat in Richard's office, staring at a power of attorney form that bore what appeared to be my signature. A reasonable facsimile, but not my own distinctive hand. This is forged, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, considering the earthquake happening inside me. I never signed this. Richard nodded, his expression grave. I suspected as much. Mrs. Collins, I recommend you take immediate steps to protect your assets. If they're attempting this, there may be other vulnerabilities we should address. I thought of the small inheritance from William carefully preserved in that safety deposit box. The municipal bonds, the few pieces of jewelry with more sentimental than monetary value, my mother's pearls, William's pocket watch. What do you suggest? I asked. Before Richard could respond, his office phone rang. He answered, listened, then covered the receiver. It's your son. He's in the lobby insisting on speaking with me. I felt something shift inside me, something final and irrevocable. Tell him I'm here, I said. It's time we had an honest conversation. Robert's face paled when he saw me sitting in Richard Harris's office. He froze in the doorway, his confident stride faltering. Mom. He managed his voice tight. I've been looking everywhere for you. Have you? I asked mildly. Or have you been looking for access to my safety deposit box? Richard stood his presence commanding, despite his advanced years. Mr. Collins, I've explained that the document you presented appears to have irregularities. In fact, your mother has just confirmed she never signed it. Robert's gaze darted between us, calculation visible behind his eyes. I knew that look. I'd seen it when he was 7 and broke my favorite vase. When he was 16 and took the car without permission. When he was 24 and needed money for his first business venture. There's clearly been a misunderstanding, he said smoothly, shifting to damage control. Mom, we discussed this a few months ago. Remember after you had that fall? I hadn't fallen, not once. You suggested it would be easier if I could handle certain matters for you. He continued, fabricating a conversation that had never occurred. You were worried about managing your affairs as you get older. Richard's expression hardened. Mr. Collins, falsifying a power of attorney is a serious legal matter. Robert's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of panic. I would never. This is ridiculous. Mom, tell him there's been a mistake. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. The expensive suit that couldn't quite hide his spreading middle. The carefully maintained hair, hiding the first signs of recession. The manicured nails and designer watch. When had he become this person, this stranger who would forge my signature to gain access to my modest assets? The only mistake, I said quietly, was believing you still had any respect for me. Robert's face flushed. That's not fair. I've always what? I interrupted. Always remembered my birthday, always included me in family gatherings, always been honest about where the money from my house went. The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Collins, Richard said gently. Would you like me to call security? I shook my head. No, but I would like to make some changes to my accounts. Robert took a step forward. Mom, you're overreacting. Let's discuss this at home. My home, I corrected him. My very small home that I live in because I sold my house to help Emily, except the money apparently went toward a condo for her and Michael. Instead, Richard cleared his throat. Mr. Collins, I need to speak with your mother privately. I'll have to ask you to leave. She's confused, Robert protested. She's getting on in years, and sometimes. I'm 72, not senile, I said sharply. And I've never been clear about anything in my life. Leave now, Robert, or Mr. Harris will call security. After a tense moment, Robert straightened his jacket and headed for the door. This isn't over, he said, an echo of Karen's earlier threat. No, I agreed. It isn't. After he left, Richard turned to me with concern. Mrs. Collins, I strongly recommend we take immediate steps to secure your finances. For the next hour, Richard helped me revoke all existing signatory privileges Robert might have had on any of my accounts. We changed passwords, security questions, and access protocols. Richard even suggested a small local law firm specializing in elder protection. It might be wise to speak with them, he advised. Given the attempted forgery, there could be other vulnerabilities we haven't identified. I nodded, feeling both empowered and exhausted. Thank you, Richard. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't called me. His kind eyes crinkled at the corners. I've been a banker for 45 years, Mrs. Collins. I've seen families at their best and at their worst. Unfortunately, money often brings out the latter. As I gathered my purse to leave, Richard hesitated. Mrs. Collins, Margaret, may I ask what you plan to do now? I considered his question. I'm not entirely sure, I admitted, but for the first time in years, I'll be making my own decisions. Outside the bank, I stood on the sidewalk momentarily overwhelmed by the busy street, the pedestrians rushing past, the endless possibilities stretching before me. For so long, my world had contracted to a small apartment and occasional uncomfortable family gatherings where I was tolerated rather than welcomed. Now suddenly, I was free. Free from expectations. Free from the desperate hope that someday my family would see me, really see me. But freedom, I was discovering, could be terrifying. My phone rang. Karen again. I silenced it without a second thought. Instead, I called a number I hadn't used in months. Hello, a warm, familiar voice answered. Dorothy, I said, my voice catching slightly. It's Margaret. I was wondering. Is your offer to visit still open? Dorothy had been my closest friend for 45 years before moving to Vermont 5 years ago to be near her daughter. She'd invited me countless times to visit, but I'd always declined, worried about being away in case Robert or Emily needed me. Margaret, Dorothy exclaimed. Of course it's still open. I've been saving your bedroom for ages. When can you come? For the first time in days, I felt myself smile. A genuine smile that reached all the way to my eyes. How about next week? I suggested. Later that evening, as I packed a small suitcase for my visit to Dorothy, my doorbell rang again. This time, it was Emily standing in the hallway. Her eyes red-rimmed, her expression a practiced mixture of hurt and indignation. "Grandma," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to talk." I held the door open, allowing her into my apartment. Unlike her parents, Emily at least had the decency to hug me, though it felt perfunctory. "Would you like some tea?" I offered. She shook her head. "I can't stay long. She took a deep breath. "Grandma Michael and I had to cancel our honeymoon because of what happened with the hotel bill. Dad says you're refusing to help." I studied my granddaughter, this beautiful young woman who had once sat at my kitchen table coloring pictures and telling me her dreams. When had she become so entitled? When had gratitude been replaced by expectation? "Emily," I said gently, "do you remember your name tag for me at the wedding?" She looked momentarily confused. "What name tag?" "The one that said the absent old lady," I reminded her. "The one that ensured I knew exactly what you all think of me." Her cheeks flushed. "I didn't. That wasn't—" "Please don't lie to me," I interrupted. "I saw the wedding planner's notes about minimal interaction as requested by the bride's mother. I know I was deliberately sidelined." Emily sat down heavily on my sofa, her designer purse sliding to the floor. "Grandma, you don't understand," Karen thought. "I understand perfectly," I said, "and I've made my decision. The wedding costs are your responsibility as outlined in the contract your father signed. But the honeymoon is a luxury, not a necessity," I finished for her. "Perhaps you could use the down payment on that condo your parents bought you." Her eyes widened. "How did you know about that?" "I just found out today. Apparently that's where the money from my house went, the house I sold to pay for your education." Emily had the grace to look ashamed, if only briefly. "Dad said that was an investment we all agreed on." "An investment," I repeated. "Yes, that's exactly how he described it to me as well. Funny how differently we interpreted that word." I sighed, suddenly tired of the conversation, of the pretense of the years of being used while being kept at arm's length. "Emily, I'm going away for a while. I need some time to think about what happens next." "Going away," she echoed, finally noticing my half-packed suitcase. "Where? For how long?" "I'm not sure yet," I answered truthfully. "But I've spent years making myself available to a family that only wanted me when it was convenient. It's time I lived for myself for a change." Emily stood, her expression hardening into something that reminded me painfully of Karen. "So you're abandoning us when we need you most." The irony of her statement was so profound that I almost laughed. Instead, I went to my bookshelf and removed a photo album, opening it to a page I knew by heart. I handed it to Emily. "This is you at 6, staying with me the summer your parents were separating," I said, pointing to a photo of a gap-toothed Emily holding a paintbrush. "And this is you at 12, the Christmas your father was too busy with his new girlfriend to pick you up. This one is your high school graduation, where I sat in the back row because Karen said there wasn't enough room in the family section." I gently took the album back. "I have never abandoned you, Emily. Not once in 25 years. I cannot say the same for any of you." The morning train to Burlington rolled steadily through the countryside, the rhythmic clacking of wheels against tracks matching the beating of my heart. I gazed out the window, watching small towns and verdant fields pass by. Each mile increased the distance between me and the remnants of a family that had treated me as an afterthought. I had left before dawn, leaving no forwarding address, no note explaining my absence. For once, they would experience what I had felt for years, the unsettling emptiness of reaching out to someone who simply wasn't there. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since yesterday. I'd silenced it after Emily's visit, but occasionally glanced at the screen. Missed calls from Robert Karen. Emily, even Michael had tried once, undoubtedly pressured by his new wife. I imagined them huddled around a phone, strategizing how to reach me, how to regain control of the situation of me. I turned off my phone and slipped it into my purse. Dorothy was waiting at the Burlington station, her silver hair gleaming in the late morning sun, her arms open wide. We embraced like the old friends we were, tears mingling with laughter. "Let me look at you," she said, holding me at arm's length. Still elegant as ever, but thinner. "Have you been eating properly?" I laughed softly. "Always the mother hen." "Someone has to be," she replied, linking her arm through mine as we walked to her car. Dorothy's cottage sat on a bluff overlooking the Vermont coast. The endless blue horizon stretched beyond the weathered deck. White clapboard walls, blue shutters, and a garden bursting with late summer blooms. It was everything she had described in her letters. "It's beautiful," I said as we carried my suitcase inside. "It's peaceful," Dorothy corrected, setting a kettle on the stove. "And exactly what you need right now." Over tea and homemade scones, I told her everything. The wedding, the name tag, the forged power of attorney, the confrontations. Dorothy listened without interruption, her expression shifting from shock to outrage to sorrow. "Oh, Margaret," she sighed when I finished. "I've always thought Robert was too influenced by that woman, but this is beyond the pale." "I enabled it," I admitted. "For years I made excuses for them. I told myself they were busy, that family dynamics change as children grow older. I convinced myself that being occasionally remembered was better than being completely forgotten." Dorothy reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "What will you do now?" I looked out the window, watching seagulls wheel against the clear blue sky. "I'm not sure. For the first time in decades, I'm making decisions just for me. It's terrifying and exhilarating at the same time." That evening, we sat on the deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks below was hypnotic soothing. "I've been thinking," Dorothy said, breaking our comfortable silence. "My neighbor Marilyn runs the local art center. They're looking for someone to teach beginner watercolor classes a few afternoons a week. It's nothing fancy, mostly retirees and summer visitors." "But I haven't painted in years," I interrupted gently. "But you were good, Margaret. Remember that summer in Provence after William died? Your landscapes captured something special, a quality of light, a sense of peace." I smiled at the memory. After William's sudden death, when grief had threatened to consume me, Dorothy had convinced me to join her on a painting retreat in southern France. For 3 weeks, we'd sat in lavender fields and village squares, trying to capture on paper the beauty around us. It had been a lifeline during the darkest period of my life. "I'm not sure I remember how," I confessed. Dorothy laughed. "It's like riding a bicycle. Besides the position pays, not much but enough to supplement your Social Security. You could stay here as long as you like rent-free." Dorothy, I couldn't impose. "It's not an imposition," she insisted. "This house is too big for just me. The guest room is always empty except when my daughter visits at Christmas. And frankly, I've missed having my best friend around." I felt tears prick my eyes. "You're serious?" "Completely," she affirmed. "Stay a week. Stay a month. If you like it here, stay longer. No pressure, no expectations." No pressure, no expectations. The words washed over me like a benediction. 2 days later, I received an email from Richard Harris at the bank. Robert had returned this time with Karen, insisting there had been a misunderstanding about the power of attorney. When Richard had explained that I had left town indefinitely, they had demanded my location. Richard, of course, had not provided it. "I wanted to warn you," his email concluded, "that they seemed determined to locate you. Mr. Collins mentioned something about a family emergency requiring your immediate attention." I smiled grimly, imagining what this emergency might be: the hotel bill, no doubt, or perhaps some new financial demand. That afternoon, I agreed to meet with Marilyn at the Art Center, a converted boathouse overlooking the harbor. The space was bright and airy, with large windows capturing the shifting coastal light. "Dorothy speaks very highly of your talents," Marilyn said, showing me around the studio. "We've had a surge of interest in our beginner classes, but our current instructor can only handle so many students." "I haven't taught before," I admitted. "I'm not sure I'd be any good at it." Marilyn, a brisk woman in her 60s with short gray hair and paint-splattered jeans, waved away my concerns. "Do you love painting?" "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "Can you explain to someone how to mix colors, how to hold a brush, how to see the world as shapes and light rather than objects?" I thought about the hours I'd spent teaching Emily to paint when she was young, guiding her small hand as she learned to create flowers and trees and people. "Yes," I said, "I can do that." "Then you can teach," Marilyn declared. "Start next Tuesday with the morning group. They're mostly retirees, very forgiving of first-time instructors." As we finalized the details, my phone, which I had finally turned back on, began to ring. Emily's name flashed on the screen. "Excuse me," I said to Marilyn. "I should take this." Stepping outside, I answered the call. "Hello, Emily." "Grandma." Her voice was tight with tension. "Where are you? We've been worried sick." "I'm visiting a friend," I replied calmly. "As I told you I would." "Dad says you emptied your accounts and disappeared," she accused. "He says you're having some kind of breakdown." I laughed, the sound carried away by the salt breeze. "I'm not having a breakdown, Emily. I'm finally putting myself first. But what about the family? What about the hotel bill?" I finished for her. "Or is there another financial emergency I'm supposed to solve?" Her silence confirmed my suspicion. "Emily," I said gently, "I taught you to paint when you were 6 years old. Do you remember that?" "What does that have to do with anything?" she asked, frustration evident in her voice. "Everything," I replied. "I've just accepted a position teaching watercolor at an art center. I'm going to be staying here for a while." "Where is here?" she demanded. I looked out at the harbor, at the boats bobbing gently in the late afternoon sun, at the seagulls circling overhead. A profound sense of peace settled over me. "Somewhere, I'm respected," I answered simply. "Somewhere, I belong." Autumn, in coastal Vermont, painted the world in brilliant hues of crimson and gold. 6 months had passed since I'd fled my old life. 6 months of peaceful mornings watching the sun rise over the Atlantic afternoons, teaching eager students the basics of watercolor, and evenings on Dorothy's deck, sharing wine and memories under star-filled skies. My modest salary from the Art Center covered my personal expenses, allowing me to preserve my savings. I had opened a new account at a local bank, transferring my funds from the city. Richard Harris had been instrumental in helping me secure my finances, ensuring Robert could never again attempt to gain access. The calls from my family had grown less frequent as weeks passed. Robert had left increasingly angry voicemails, his frustration evident in every clipped word. Karen had tried a different approach, leaving saccharine messages about how much everyone missed me, how Emily was suffering without her grandmother's guidance. Only Emily's calls held any note of genuine concern, though even those were tinged with self-interest. I'd answered only a few, keeping the conversations brief and vague about my whereabouts. Each call had ended the same way, with inquiries about when I'd come to my senses and return home to help with the outstanding wedding costs. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when Dorothy entered the kitchen, her expression troubled as she handed me the local newspaper. "You might want to see this," she said quietly. There in the real estate section was a small but eye-catching advertisement: "Historic Vermont cottage for sale." Ideal vacation home or retirement property. Lovingly maintained for generations, this charming seaside residence boasts original details and spectacular ocean views. Contact Collins Properties for details. Below the text was a photograph of my parents' old summer cottage, the one they had left to me, the one I had carefully maintained over decades, despite rarely being able to visit. The cottage that until that moment I had almost forgotten I owned. My hands trembled as I set down the paper. "This isn't possible," I whispered. "I never authorized this. The property is in my name alone." Dorothy's concerned gaze met mine. "The contact information Collins Properties," I confirmed. "Robert's Real Estate Development Company." I immediately called my bank in the city. Richard wasn't available, but his assistant promised he would call back as soon as possible. Next, I contacted the local clerk's office in the Vermont county where the cottage was located. "I need to verify the current ownership of a property," I explained, giving them the address. After a brief hold, the clerk returned with troubling news. "According to our records, ownership of that property was transferred 3 weeks ago to Collins Properties, LLC. My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I'm Margaret Collins, the legal owner. I never signed any transfer documents." "Ma'am, I have the deed transfer right here," the clerk replied. "It appears to be properly executed with your signature witnessed and notarized." Another forgery, but this one had succeeded where the power of attorney attempt had failed. When Richard finally called back, his voice was grave. "Mrs. Collins, I was planning to contact you today. There have been some concerning developments." I explained what I discovered about the cottage. Richard sighed heavily. "I was afraid of this. Your son came in last month with what appeared to be transfer documents for a property in Vermont, since it wasn't related to your accounts here and the documents seemed in order." "You had no reason to question it," I finished for him. "I understand, Richard." "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Collins. If I had known." "It's not your fault," I assured him, "but I need your help again." By that afternoon, I was sitting in the office of Susan Mitchell, an attorney specializing in elder law whom Richard had recommended. After reviewing my documentation and hearing my story, her expression turned resolute. "What they've done is illegal," she stated flatly. "Forgery, fraud, and elder abuse. We can fight this, Mrs. Collins." "Will it be expensive?" I asked, mentally calculating my limited resources. Susan smiled grimly. "Normally, yes, but in this case, I think we can manage something. I have connections with the district attorney's office. Given the pattern of behavior, the attempted power of attorney fraud, followed by this property theft, they might be interested in pursuing this case." "I don't want my son to go to jail," I said reflexively, then paused, surprised by my own reaction. After everything Robert had done, I still instinctively protected him. Susan's gaze softened. "That's not unusual. You know, most of my elderly clients struggle with the same conflict. They want justice, but can't bear to see their children suffer, even when those children have betrayed them terribly." I nodded, grateful for her understanding. "We have options," she continued. "Our first step will be sending a cease and desist letter regarding the property listing, coupled with a demand for immediate deed restoration. We'll make it clear that failure to comply will result in criminal charges." That evening, I sat on Dorothy's deck watching the sunset, a tumbler of whiskey warming my hands. The temperature had dropped, bringing with it the first hint of winter's approach. "What are you thinking?" Dorothy asked, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. "I'm thinking about second chances," I replied. "About whether some wounds can ever truly heal." Dorothy settled into the chair beside me. "Are you having doubts about pursuing this?" I shook my head. "Not doubts exactly, more like recognition. I've spent so many years making excuses for them, creating a fictional family in my mind, one that valued me, one that would never betray me the way they have." And now, Dorothy prompted gently, now I understand that the family I've been mourning never actually existed. I've been grieving a fantasy, not a reality. The next morning, a familiar number appeared on my phone. Michael Emily's husband. Curious, I answered. Margaret, he began dispensing with pleasantries. This has gone far enough. You need to call off your lawyer. Hello to you too, Michael, I replied calmly. I assume you're calling about the cottage. It's just a rundown old house, he said dismissively. You never even visit it. Robert was going to develop the property, turn it into something useful. The profits would have benefited the whole family. The whole family, I repeated. You mean like the money from my house allegedly benefited Emily's education before being diverted to your condo? Michael's tone hardened. That's ancient history. The point is, this legal action is an overreaction. No one wants to see the family reputation damaged by a public legal battle. Ah, there it was. The real concern, not the cottage itself, but the potential scandal of fraud charges against Robert Collins, respected businessman and community leader. If Robert returns the property and ceases all attempts to access my assets, I'll consider dropping the matter, I offered. That's not reasonable, Michael countered. The listing already has interested buyers. Contracts are being prepared. There's money invested in this project. Money invested in property stolen from me, I corrected him. My answer is final, Michael. Return what belongs to me or face the consequences. After hanging up, I felt an unfamiliar sensation bubbling up from my chest. Something between laughter and exhilaration. For 72 years, I had been the peacemaker, the one who compromised, the one who sacrificed to maintain family harmony. No more. Susan's strategy worked faster than either of us anticipated. Within 48 hours of her legal notice being delivered, the property listing disappeared.